Hey everybody. Welcome to this week's AP Lang Q&A. So if you're new here, I go live each Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and I answer student and teacher questions about the upcoming AP Lang exam. So if you're just joining us, feel free to enter questions in the chat. I would be happy to answer them. So let me know if you have any questions about any of the AP Lang FRQs, or if you have questions about multiple choice, or just what to expect on exam day. I'm happy to answer any of those questions. As of right now, the exam is a few months away, so there's still plenty of time to prepare. But I also know that this is the time of year when students start to get a little bit anxious. They start to have lots of questions about different AP Lang related topics. So let me know what you are wondering about, and I would be happy to answer your questions. So let's start by talking about like the general setup of the AP Lang exam, because I know some students maybe haven't written all the essay types yet, or maybe you haven't done a whole lot of multiple choice practice. So I think it's important to know what you're actually expected to know going into this test. So first of all, on exam day, you're going to have 1 hour to answer 45 multiple choice questions. Someone left a comment on a TikTok video that I made earlier this week asking if it was 45 or 55 questions. And the answer is it's 45 questions. And part of the reason why is because it used to be 55, and then they redid the exam back in 2019, 2020, that year. And so now we have reading passages and writing passages. So the reading passages for multiple choice are going to be longer, and you have anywhere from, like, let's say 10 to 13 questions per passage. So between the two reading passages, that amounts to about half of your multiple choice. And then you're going to have the writing questions. And so those are basically kind of like editing questions. So they're things like, how should the writer transition from this paragraph to this paragraph? Or what transition words should they use? Should they add the sentence? Should they delete the sentence? Things like that. My students actually really like the writing questions on the AP Lang multiple choice, because they say that they're a little bit easier, the passages are shorter, things like that. So you have 45 questions in 1 hour. And you're going to need a number 2 pencil for that on test day if you're taking the paper test. And so you can actually answer the questions in any order you want to. It's just important to make sure that you answer all the questions, because basically the multiple choice portion is going to be 45% of your composite score. So your composite score is going to be a number between 1 and 5. Ideally, we're shooting for a 3, 4, or 5, because that's most likely going to get you college credit depending on where you go. And so 45% of that composite is going to be your multiple choice. And so in that case, each multiple choice question is worth 1 point. So you want to be sure to answer all of them, even if it's just a guess. Now, for the multiple choice, there's going to be 5 answer choices. So a little bit different than the SAT or ACT. But here's the thing about AP Lang multiple choice. Because you have 5 answer choices, you can pretty much assume that at least 2 of the answer choices are like throwaway answers, meaning if you've read the passage, you immediately know these are not it. So it's okay to cross them out if you're taking the paper test, but basically, like, you ignore those. Then there's usually one answer choice that maybe sounds like it could be good. It might use words from the passage, but it's like not relevant. Either it's like not talking about the right part of the text or something like that. And so then you're left with the top 2 answers. And this is where I think students tend to struggle, because usually students will tell me, like, oh, I can narrow it down to the top 2, but then I don't know which one's right. And so that's where you really want to start looking at the wording of the answer choices themselves, because sometimes a single word can make an answer choice wrong. So you really want to look at, does the answer choice that you're choosing offer the most precise answer, and is it actually answering the question that's being asked? So right now, if you're just joining us, we are chatting about AP Lang multiple choice. So if you have any questions about AP Lang multiple choice, feel free to drop those in the chat and let me know how I can help you. So let me just give you some general tips that have helped my students with AP Lang multiple choice, because I think honestly, it's probably the harder thing to study for, because the passages change. And so I would say that one of the things that you need to be aware of is that the passages are going to be nonfiction passages for the reading passages. So you can actually use SAT and ACT passages to help you study. Now, some of the questions aren't going to be the same, but some of them will be. And so if you're already studying for the SAT using those release tests, there used to be 10 that are publicly available, and I think they took a couple of them down. So there are maybe like 6 to 8 left, and you can also use Khan Academy. But there are publicly available SAT tests, and you can actually use those to help you study for AP Lang. So make sure that you're focusing on nonfiction passages for the ACT and the SAT. That's going to be not the first passage because that's a literary narrative one, but the other passages as well. Now, on the SAT, if you're using that to practice, just ignore the questions about graphs and where it says, like, what's the best evidence to the previous question. You can still answer those, especially if you are taking the SAT. But if you're only looking at it for AP Lang purposes, those questions really won't be on the test. So, one tip for you for those reading questions is try to figure out what is going to be the best test taking strategy for you. Some of my students really like to read the passage and then go answer the questions and then kind of go back to the passage as they need to. But I have other students that have said that it's much more helpful to them if they look at the questions first, and that way they know what they're looking for. Thank you for the likes, by the way, on TikTok. And so I think the reason why that can help some students is because sometimes, let's face it, the passages are kind of boring and it can be easier to read with a purpose. So if you know that there's going to be questions about certain words or certain people or certain paragraphs, you can know that going in and you can kind of streamline your process, because a lot of the questions for the reading portion are basically explicitly in the text, meaning like you can turn to a portion of the text and you'll have your answer. Some of them involve inference, and those are a little bit harder, but a lot of them you should be able to directly go to the passage and be able to answer that question. Okay, so that can be really helpful because if you're trying to streamline the process, especially if you're running out of time, prioritize those types of questions. Now, some of the questions will ask you, like, what does this word mean? And it gives you a line number. Always read the surrounding sentences. And that tip goes for the SAT and the ACT as well, because sometimes there's a context clue before that word. So don't just read the line that they give you, read the surrounding words. I've had students in class answer a question wrong. And then when we went over the answer and I told them, hey, here's your context clue, they're like, oh, I didn't even really look at that sentence. I was looking at the one that they were asking about. And so then they were like, oh, yeah, I kind of missed it. And so it's a good learning experience to have before test day as well. Okay, so I see some questions coming in the chat. So let me try to answer some of those. Where can you get practice problems? Okay, so here's the downside to AP Lang is there's not a ton of publicly available things, but let me tell you what you can access. If you're looking for SAT or ACT questions to use as a practice, because they're pretty close. I use them for my students because my students take the ACT. If you type in SAT practice tests into your search bar, you're going to see something that comes up from the College Board, and it's going to say like SAT Suite or something like that. Suite as in SUITE. And then that's where you can start to access the SAT tests. And there's going to be an answer document that's separate. So you can use that as practice. It's not totally the same, but it is close. It's good practice. So that would be one option. I believe Khan Academy is also free, and they have the same SAT tests on Khan Academy. So that would be an option. And then there's some free ACT stuff as well, if that's the test that you're taking. There's also, if you're looking for like AP Lang specific things that are free, there is a document called the course exam description. This document is a PDF. It's super long and it's really meant for teachers. However, around page, I think it's like 122, there are 17 practice questions. And if you keep scrolling, then there's an answer key. So I use those 17 questions with some of my tutoring students and also my own AP Lang students because it kind of gives you like one of every question type. It's good practice. So those are free. And again, that was the AP Lang course exam description. Scroll to page, I think it's 122. All the other stuff in there is for teachers and you're going to find it boring. But the answer key is a couple pages behind that. There is AP Classroom. If your teacher uses that, there's the progress checks, but also teachers can assign extra practice. And there are 3 full-length tests on AP Classroom as well. So if your teacher doesn't use AP Classroom, maybe you could talk to your teacher and see if they could give you some extra practice. I don't think there's a way for students to just choose practice problems. I think they have to be assigned to you, but that's an option. And then Marco Learning has a free practice test. You do have to put in your email in order to get the practice test, but I have found that it's pretty close to the real thing. So again, that's Marco Learning. They have a free practice test. And then also, this one's not free, but it's a decent price, and that is the Ultimate Review Packet, which is something that Tim Freitas from the Garden of English made. And he just added a brand new full test in that one as well. So that one is not very expensive considering all that you get. I do not personally recommend the test prep books just because like they're not always super accurate. I've had students try the questions in that and then like got a way lower score than what they got on something from the College Board. And some of the answer choices were a little iffy. So I just don't have a textbook that I recommend. But yeah, Khan Academy is good as well, especially if you're doing the SAT. All right, so thank you for all the comments on TikTok. Let me kind of scroll through because I was talking about multiple choice. I'm scared, help. Okay, well, if it's about AP Lang, then let me know how I can help you. I'll answer whatever questions you have. My teacher said I picked 2 complex points to argue for my rhetorical analysis, but I don't want to be broad. How do I fix that? I would really like to see like what you argue because it's kind of hard to answer that. I think like, so they're too complex. Do you mean like there's too much for you to say in the amount of time that you have? Because you're right, you don't want to be too broad. You want to have a claim that you're trying to prove, and you want to have specific evidence and then commentary, and ideally more commentary than evidence. I tell my students for rhetorical analysis to try to break up the passage into sections. So some of the longer passages, it makes sense to do like beginning, middle, end. But then like shorter passages, it might be like first half, second half. So ask yourself, what are they doing in the first half or in the beginning? And that can be broad. Like one of the speeches that we look at is like FDR's Pearl Harbor speech. And so we talk about how basically like in the beginning, he's creating a common enemy, which is like a really broad choice. But I like it when students write about that because you can ask yourself, okay, how does he create a common enemy? Well, it's through like his word choice and his use of contrast, and his word choice creates a certain tone. So there's a lot more to say to really develop that paragraph. So I think it kind of depends. And it wouldn't be wrong if a student just looked at contrast or just looked at word choice. So I do have some videos on that on my channel too. I reference like my top 2 are probably Florence Kelly. I really like that speech. And FDR, I use him a lot. So I'm the student who looks at the questions first. Yeah, I wish I knew to do that in high school. Talking about multiple choice, because once I figured out, I think it was like in college that I figured out that I could do that. It was like so much more streamlined when I was taking the test. I felt like I had more control. So it does not work for everybody though. I've had some students be like, Coach Hall, I can't do it that way. It does not help. And so I let my students choose. Like I make them try both options. And I have some students every year who are like, yeah, questions first, and other students who are like, no. So just whatever. Would you recommend skipping conclusion paragraphs and continuing to the next essay? It depends on your timing. Here's the thing about conclusion paragraphs. If you're just writing like a 1-sentence conclusion or maybe like 2 sentences, and you're just restating your thesis that you already wrote a defensible thesis for, then it's probably not really helping anything. It's also probably not taking you that long. But I have seen students write developed conclusions that are actually meaningful. So I think there's a couple things that I would ask you to consider. Number 1 is how much time is remaining. And what's going to get you the most points. So like, yeah, in a lot of cases, I would say if you feel like you've written, let's say a 4 out of 6, and you don't think that the conclusion that you've written is going to help anything score wise, then yeah, absolutely move on. Because the other thing is you can always come back to it. So like you could leave enough space for you to keep writing, but like I think it's important to realize that the test is essentially like a game. Like you have to try to earn as many points as possible. And like the essays where I've seen the conclusion matter, the rest of the essay was also really strong. So if it's going to be like a really simplistic conclusion then I would say no, you probably don't need to do that. It might be better to move on. Just because, especially if like you know that you take longer than 40 minutes on certain essays, or if you're just like super stressed, it might be better to spend your time focusing on the body paragraphs of other essays. So, again, like, good question. Most of my students, like, I tell them that's the first thing to go is like, if you do not have time, do not bother with a conclusion. So, it really depends on how much time you have. And like, if you had any thoughts that would be like really meaningful in the conclusion, because if not, then you're probably better off spending your time on the other essays. Okay, so if some argument essay evidence is somewhat specific, will the score be an automatic 2? Okay, that's a really good question. So, okay, though this is kind of like how I personally look at it, and I have been an AP reader for 2 years, but like if you look at the rubric, it says for argument, it's like somewhat specific, and then it tells you about the commentary. And then if you go to the next row, it says specific evidence for a 3, and then it tells you about the commentary. And then for 4, it's like the same thing, specific, and then it has like more developed commentary. So basically, for a 3, you have to have specific evidence, and then you have to basically argue one claim well. And then like a 4 is like all claims well. I'm kind of paraphrasing here. So when I look at a student's essay, if it's all somewhat specific evidence, then yes, it stays at that 2. Um, if they have some specific evidence and some somewhat specific evidence, then that kind of becomes a little iffy. But the first thing I look for is the quality of their evidence, because if you only have somewhat specific evidence, then you can't progress from the 2 to the 3, if that makes sense. Now, the other thing is like, okay, let's say you do have specific evidence, but then your commentary is not so great. Well, then if you don't meet all of the things on the rubric, then presumably we'd go down. So it's can use the rubric kind of like a checklist, if that makes sense. Um, let's see. Where do I get practice problems? I think I already answered that, but the free SAT and ACT stuff online in Khan Academy are the best spots. And then Marco Learning has that free practice test. You just have to enter your email. My teacher gave us practice essays and I got a 3, 4, 4.5. I see what I did wrong, but I feel I'll do it wrong again in the same way. That sometimes happens because like the prompt change, but like it's this is the thing is like you want to make sure you understand why you earned the score that you did and what you need to do to get it to the next level. And I think sometimes students do write the same score. Like here's the thing, and this is what I kind of find a little frustrating sometimes about rubrics in general. Is you could have an essay that scores a 120, but there's kind of a range of what falls in the category of the 120. And so it could be like the lowest end of a 2 in evidence and commentary, like it could barely be a 2. But then you can make improvements and the essay could be better the next time, but it's still not yet a 3. But it's like almost a 3, just not yet a 3. And you still get a 120. That's why in my class, I give a lot of half points because if I can see a student is trying, then I give like a 2.5 or a 3.5. I also give a 0.5 on sophistication because the sophistication points are really hard to earn. So I think that's something to consider as well. But knowing the rubric and also looking at sample essays. There are release samples online, and my students have said those are really helpful because they're able to kind of see, okay, this is what this student did, and here's why it got that score. And then we kind of talk about, okay, like what could you do differently? And like how could you use that to help you? Also, like my students who are trying to earn the sophistication point, we look at the essays that earned it and then the ones that didn't. So like a 141 and like a 140, a 131 if there's one available. And I have my students kind of practice. Like there was one that we looked at last week where it was really creative. And my students then wrote the essay and they tried to kind of mimic that style. And the one thing they said was like, I don't think I could do this for every prompt. So it's kind of good to just practice. But yes, as the prompt changes, sometimes it's harder to apply those corrections. But hopefully, if you're getting like you got a 3 and then you got a 4 and then a 4.5, hopefully like your teacher's giving you somewhat of an explanation as to like why you earned that score. That way you can kind of track your own progress. The best advice I have for everybody in that front though is basically like make sure that you have multiple paragraphs, so at least 2 body paragraphs, make sure that you're developing your claims. So you're going to have a topic sentence that's your main idea, your main claim, and then you need specific evidence and developed commentary. And so if your paragraph is super short and you're not really pushing yourself to develop those ideas, that's going to be the next step for you. Because sometimes when I see essays like where kids write like a paragraph that's like that big, I'm like, that's a red flag. So yeah. All right, let's see what else we got. Is the Okay, so yes, it is similar. So multiple choice is similar to the SAT reading. So the SAT has two parts. There's the reading part, which is like the comprehension part, and then there's the writing and language section. So on the AP Lang test, you're going to have the first two passages are reading passages. So that's like SAT and ACT reading. It's comprehension, nonfiction. And then some of the questions for writing and language SAT or ACT English. That's kind of like the AP Lang writing, but it's certain ones. It's questions about like transitions and logical order. It's not the questions about like commas, dashes, semicolons. That stuff is SAT and ACT only. I actually have some videos on my YouTube channel about like multiple choice writing tips. So if you just search for Coach Hall writes or Coach Hall AP Lang multiple choice or AP Lang writing multiple choice, those videos should come up. So yeah, you don't need to know about like commas and dashes and stuff for the AP Lang writing questions. It's good to know how to use them though. Part of the reason why is because if you can use them in your own writing, it really helps kind of vary your sentence structure. Like it's actually refreshing when people use a colon or dashes correctly. What essay do you think we should start with on the exam? Okay, honestly, that's a great question. Here's the thing. So when it gets closer to the AP Lang test, I do something with my students where we come up with a game plan. And I did a video about this previously. I'm also going to be offering a workshop for students if they want to kind of go through it step by step with me. So if you're curious about that, just feel free to reach out. I have it, I think, linked on TikTok, at least in my link tree. But anyway, point is one of the questions that I have students ask themselves is what are their strengths? Most of my students, no matter what their strengths are, want to start with synthesis. And part of the reason why is because it is the most like time consuming of the essays because you have to read the sources and it just feels like a lot. And so for whatever reason, most students start with that. I have a theory that that's why the synthesis scores are sometimes the highest average. I could be wrong, but I think most people start with that. And then therefore they devote the most time to it, or at least they definitely get that done. Whereas with like rhetorical analysis and argument, sometimes we see a lower average, or sometimes people don't even attempt those. Please attempt every essay. Like write a thesis in a body paragraph. At least give yourself a chance for like a 3 out of 6. But anyway, I would say most students start with synthesis. And then I think then you got to ask yourself, are you stronger with rhetorical analysis or argument? A lot of my students tend to prefer rhetorical analysis, and they also feel like they need more time with it. So they do the exam in order because they can probably write a decent argument essay in like 30 minutes. Like they could probably get the score they were going to get in 30 minutes as opposed to 40. But for rhetorical analysis, they might want a little extra time. And that's the thing is like you are suggested to do 40 minutes per essay, but what they'll tell you, like the person proctoring your test will be like, 40 minutes is up. Like we encourage you to move on to the next essay, whatever they say. And like, but you don't have to. Like you literally have that 2 hours and 15 minutes to break up however you want. So I would say most people start with synthesis, and I tend to agree with that. And then you'd have to decide like which one is the next best choice. And I think that kind of depends on like what you feel most comfortable with. This is random, but I had too many APs to fit Lang in this year. Is it worth taking my senior year? In my opinion, yes. So typically students take Lang as a junior and then Lit as a senior. But here's why I think you should take Lang if your school will let you. AP Lang is going to be more useful to you going into college because AP Lang is very similar to College English 1. It's going to teach you how to argue, how to synthesize, which is like research. And AP Lit is going to be poetry, short fiction, and novels. Now, not to knock AP Lit, I do think it's a good class, but unless you are going to be an English major in college, I don't think you need AP Lit. But I think the skills that you learn in AP Lang are actually potentially very helpful to you in the long run. I think honestly, AP Lang is one of the most useful classes for students, regardless of what score you get on the exam. And I'm not just saying that because I teach AP Lang. Like I've had students come back and be like, hey, I didn't get the exam score that I wanted, but like because of your class, I now know how to write. And so doing essays in college is not very hard. And these are not students who are English majors. These are students who are majoring in like pre-med, pre-law, biology, kinesiology, poli-sci, like all those things, public relations, like whatever it is. So if you are not intending to be an English major, then I would say AP Lang instead of AP Lit, if they'll let you. And technically, the College Board has open enrollment, so they can't really deny you. Is a 4 and a 5 a passing grade? So do you mean a 4 composite and a 5 composite, or do you mean on the essay? So the composite score you're going to get from the College Board for all AP tests is going to be between 1 and 5. Most colleges need you to have at least a 3 for college credit. It kind of depends on the school. So some of the schools that my students apply to, they have to get a 4 on the AP Lang exam to get college credit, but other colleges require a 3. So you want to look at like what the individual colleges require. And then if you're applying like Ivy League, you need 5s on the exam usually. So that would be that. But then if you're talking about essays, like on the 6-point rubric, I tell my students that they need at least a 4, because that's like based on the verbiage of the rubric, that's where it shows like you got it. And so in order to get a 3 composite, I would recommend at least 23 out of 45 questions right on multiple choice, plus 4 out of 6 on each of the essays. Now, obviously, like those numbers can fluctuate, but that's just kind of like the general ballpark for my students who are trying to get a 3 composite. I religiously watched your videos last year as a junior and I ended up scoring a 5. Well, thank you so much. And also congratulations. That's awesome. Yeah. And like, I so appreciate those who binge my other channel and here on TikTok. I'm really trying to get close to 10K. I think I need like 400 more people. The reason why is on TikTok, I can make playlists once I get to 10K. And so if y'all have friends who are in AP Lang, tell them to follow here. I get it. Like you don't necessarily want to be studying when you're scrolling through TikTok, but it really does help me because then when it gets closer to the exam, I can start putting playlists together like I can on YouTube. I don't know if I'm allowed to say other platforms on live, but you get the idea. It'll help me like organize the content for y'all a lot better if I can get to 10K. Is that why it's one of the hardest? Oh, is that why AP Lit is one of the hardest? Yeah, see, what's weird is last year AP Lit had a better pass rate than AP Lang, but all of us were surprised. Or, okay, I shouldn't say all of us. Many of us were surprised. But I feel like AP Lit always has a lower pass rate than Lang, except for like last year. And there's something, nothing nefarious, like nothing bad, but it was kind of weird that like last year it was different. But like the Lang pass rate is usually pretty good. No, it's okay. Please keep asking questions. Like that's what I'm here for. And I show up live on TikTok and YouTube every Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern. And as it gets closer to the exam, I'll be doing like more lives and more opportunities to help students. And also like feel free to ask questions too, not just like in the lives, but if you comment on one of my videos, sometimes I'll do like a video reply and that way other students can learn as well. Okay, so I have a question over on the other platform about self-studying for AP Lang. So I do have a video about this, but let me give you some general tips. If you're trying to self-study and you're not in the class, or if you are in the class, but you're like, I need a little extra, I need to do stuff on my own. Here are the things that I would start doing now. If you have not written any of the essays, then you definitely need to look into what those are like. There's prompts online, there's samples online, that kind of thing. If you are studying for the SAT or ACT, then you're kind of already preparing for AP Lang multiple choice. So 2 birds, 1 stone kind of thing. As far as like the content, what I like to see students do is I like to see them broaden their world knowledge. So if you are reading nonfiction or if you're listening to TED Talks or podcasts, that can be really helpful as well. and you're going to need that information for the argument essay, or at least you can use it for the argument essay. So definitely consider that. Just kind of like paying attention in your other classes. A lot of my students who take APUSH, depending on the argument prompt, if they can bring up historical evidence, they tend to write really good paragraphs because they've covered it so intensely in APUSH that they're like experts on it and they can weave it into AP Lang. So if you're in some kind of like history class, that knowledge can prove pretty handy. But yeah, I do have some tips for self-studying. It's kind of an older video, but I do have a video about that. What do I think is the easiest essay? Okay, that kind of depends. I think overall probably synthesis because they give you the sources. So as long as you know how to write a synthesis essay, in theory, that could be the easiest. I think the reason why rhetorical analysis can be hard is because sometimes students have like, they struggle with like the deeper meaning of the passage. So they struggle with like connecting the rhetorical choices to the rhetorical situation. I think it's pretty easy to write a 1-2-0 essay without really knowing what you're doing, as long like that sounds bad, but like to get those higher scoring marks like the 5s and 6s on rhetorical analysis, I think that's a little bit more challenging. And then argument, I think argument really depends on the prompt. I think the hard part about argument is that you have to come up with your own evidence, and that can be tricky under pressure. And some of the prompts I think are harder than others, so it really depends on the prompt as well. What is AP Lang? I'm taking it next year. Is it about reading books and writing about them? Okay, so AP Lang is based on nonfiction. It really depends on how your teacher structures it, because like reading books and writing about them is not at all what my class is like. I do have my students read one book independently, and they have like lit circles. We're doing something kind of new with that this year, and I actually like the books that they got to choose. But no, for the most part, it's focused on learning how to write a synthesis essay, which is kind of like a research paper. They give you the sources though. Rhetorical analysis is when you look at like speeches and letters and other nonfiction passages, and you figure out like what the writer is doing to achieve their purpose or convey their message. And then argument, which is like they give you a prompt and you have to essentially argue. You take a position on it and you bring in your own evidence off the top of your head. But each school is a little bit different. So definitely talk to kids that are in the class at your school. There is writing involved in AP Lang, but it's writing that I think is useful for you as you go through your high school and college career. We're studying a ton of econ, philosophy, world history. Yeah, that kind of stuff actually makes for interesting argument essays. When students have like niche knowledge about history or like other topics, obviously it's kind of harder to bring that up for depending on the prompt, but like those essays are super fun to read. But there's 3 types of essays on the AP Lang exam, and they're essays that I think will be useful to you as a student. And yes, they got to choose the books. Oh yeah. So my students, here's the thing. In my AP Lang class, we, for the past several years, have not read a full length book, and there's pros and cons to that. Part of the reason why I did it that way is because we, there's no like nonfiction novel question on the exam, and we had a lot of stuff to cover. And so we did it with shorter passages. But then I was like, well, let me try it this year. So the 2 books that they chose, I gave them a bunch of options, but half the class chose In Cold Blood. And of that group, some of them like it and some of them don't. And then they also chose, the other half of the class chose, I'm going to get the title wrong. It's like, it has to do with the FBI. They like it. It's something about like Children of the Flower Moon. I'm probably getting that title wrong, but it has something about like Flower Moon. They're making it into a movie apparently in 2023. It's going to be released. But it's about like this really big like beginning case at the FBI. I think it took place in like Oklahoma. Those students are loving that book, but they had other choices. It's just my class apparently went for like the 2 that were about murder. Their choice, but yeah, I let them choose. I figure if I'm going to make them read something, they should at least have a little bit of say. Right now we're reading On Writing Well. Yeah, some of the books that people read are really popular and really good. Like a lot of schools will do like Just Mercy, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is popular, Educated. There's a lot of like nonfiction texts that you can read. So yeah. My biggest life decisions are what what AP classes to take. I never know how many. Yeah, that can be really tricky. And of course, if you're trying to go for like college credit or like valedictorian or just like a higher weighted GPA, that can be really tricky. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Should you start off by practicing writing essays, timed or not timed? That's a good question. So if you are self-studying, I would say look at some sample essays, especially high scoring sample essays. So they changed the rubric back in 2019. So if it's a 6-point rubric, you want to look at what scored a 4, a 5, or a 6. Maybe a 3, just so you can kind of see what not to do. And I sometimes have my students look at sample essays first. Like for instance, I also teach 10th grade, and my 10th graders just started their first synthesis essay. So we went through all the sources and everything, but before I had them write it, I showed them what a synthesis essay should look like because they needed to know how to do the citations and they just kind of needed to see it. So you can look at those sample essays before you write it. I would say I start my students off with either untimed essays or I time them in like segments, like because we do like one passage a week sometimes. So like sometimes I'll just be like, hey, you've got 5 minutes, write an introductory paragraph, or hey, you've got 20 minutes, write a body paragraph. And my students have said that that kind of stuff is helpful because I don't want to read a bunch of essays. They don't want to write a ton of essays. We do write them, and we'll be writing more as it gets closer to the exam, but it's a lot better to practice at like the paragraph level because then you can kind of see what's working and what's not. So that's kind of how I would stagger it. And that's also how I start a lot of my tutoring students is we start with paragraphs first before essays. So yeah. What do they allow on the AP Lang exams? Okay, so let me see if I'm understanding this right. First of all, you're going to need to, you want to show up early. Don't be that person who's rolling in at 8 a.m. Eat a good breakfast before you come. You can bring a snack. At least at our school, they sometimes give the kids like little bottles of water and a snack, but you get like a 10-minute break after multiple choice. You are going to need number 2 pencils if you're taking the paper test and also blue or black ink pens. Sometimes schools provide that. Like we always have extras for people. Get a good pen, like, and I don't mean like expensive pen. I mean like a pen that's not going to like bleed or whatever. Like make sure it's a pen that has enough ink and like is not going to smear. Everything else will be provided for you. I would say the one thing that you might want is like a watch. It can't be a smartwatch. Like it can't be a Fitbit, Apple Watch, anything like that. But what my students will sometimes do, especially if they're taking a lot of AP tests, is they will go to Walmart and they'll get the kiddie watches, like the little kids $5 watches. And it's usually kind of funny, like, because like we'll get like these big football player guys with like an LOL Dolls watch. Like my students, at least in previous years, like try to get like the like funniest watch because they don't want to spend $10-20 on a watch that they're only using for AP tests. So they purposely try to get like the cheesy ones, but they're not smartwatches. And the reason why is because you can't have a smartwatch on the test, and there is supposed to be a clock in your testing room, but some students are not good at reading the clock, or you can't see it based on where it's placed or whatever. So if you have your watch, then you can kind of keep track of your time. So that might be something that you want to bring. All the test stuff, like the different booklets that you'll need, that'll be provided for you. And they take you through the whole process, which is really helpful because it'll be like, open up this and then like do this. Like there's a ton of stuff. Like the stuff comes like shrink wrapped. If you've never taken an AP test before, like there's certain times you have to put stuff under your desk and you have to unwrap things and there's stickers. Like it's a whole process, but they tell you what to do step by step. So no essay templates or formats. No, you can't have any like outside notes. However, if you're used to using like sentence frames and things like that, keep them in your head. But yeah, you can't bring in outside notes. Can you explain the point of weighted GPAs? I only have unweighted, but I don't know why there's both. Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So colleges will sometimes ask your weighted versus unweighted GPA. So AP classes are typically weighted. Usually it's a 5-point scale. So that's how kids get a GPA of like a 4.2 out of 4. So all that means is they took an AP class and they got, instead of like a 4.0 possibility, like an A is usually 4 points, a B is 3, a C is 2. Then for AP classes, an A is 5, a B is 4. And so basically a B in an AP class is like an A in a regular class. And if you make an A in AP, then you get 5 points. And that's how you can have a weighted GPA that's higher than a 4. Or if you don't have all A's, the weighted GPA could still make it higher. So colleges want to know weighted versus unweighted just because like it just for like to have like a norm, because like for instance, like when I was in high school, we only had like 3 AP classes, I think, or 4 that we could choose from, but they were all offered at the same time. So like you had to choose. So like my weighted GPA would have been a lot lower because I didn't have the options. Like I'm working with a student now who has literally taken 18 AP classes. They're a senior. And I'm like, my school never had that. So this kid might have like a 4.5 GPA, but somebody else like might have a 4.05. And so they need to kind of know, okay, like what did you take? It's a way for them to kind of compare people a little bit more fairly. Because sometimes the weighted GPAs seem inflated. So there's a purpose for both. How do I remember it all? Okay, so there's not a whole lot that you have to memorize, which is good. Because like AP US history, AP bio, there's probably a lot of facts that you have to memorize. For AP Lang, you're not really memorizing anything. So that's kind of helpful. I have students use like a template for their thesis and sometimes their topic sentences, and we just practice with it so much that they're able to do it, and then they kind of make it their own. So I would say that's something to just like get the parts that if there's like sentence frames or things that you want to do, just like get used to using those now, and then it'll become second nature. You can make yourself a study sheet. You just can't bring it to the testing room. I wouldn't even really bring it to school with you. Maybe take a picture of it on your phone because you have to turn your phone in if you think it'll help you cram. But like, there's not really facts that you have to memorize. I would just say like there might be like certain verbs that you want to know. Like I tell my students there's certain verbs that are stronger. Like I tell them to try not to use the verb shows, but maybe like demonstrates or highlights or underscores or emphasizes. And so like with practice, they kind of internalize that and they don't need like a sheet or anything. And like I think like you'll be okay. And then one thing that you can do to kind of like prepare for the argument is like I have my students make, I call it like a database, and I have them choose like their top 3 historical figures that they know about, their top 3 historical events. Like there's a bunch of categories. And basically, the reason why I have them do that is because I want them to kind of know going into the test which topics they could write about well. Now, we have no clue what the prompts are, but last year, the prompt was about timely decisions. And so one of my students who is in APUSH, very well versed in Hamilton, not just the musical, but actual Hamilton, was like, yeah, I knew a ton about him. So I kind of knew I should probably write about timely decisions and like kind of went with it. I have them kind of keep track of like 3 to 5 personal experiences that are meaningful to them, because a lot of these things can be used in different ways because the prompts are kind of open and abstract. So I have them just kind of create this like database in like mid to end April, where they're just kind of like thinking, okay, what do I actually know about well? And my students last year said that that really helped them. Not all of them used stuff from their database because again, it doesn't always fit every prompt, but like they said, it felt like they had more control. And I will be talking about that in some of my upcoming workshops as well. If you're on TikTok and you want info about that, check like my website and stuff. But I will be talking about stuff like that on TikTok as well. Let's see. What type of essay did you take the longest to teach your students? Rhetorical analysis. Partially because that one, like, so I teach it to them when they're sophomores because they've never had it. This year, like the 9th grade is actually starting it because we adjusted some things, but I introduce it in 10th grade. We start AP with it, AP Lang with it, and then we go to synthesis, then argument, and then we go back to rhetorical analysis. So by end of February, my students, probably beginning of March, we're going back to rhetorical analysis. And then we kind of do I let them pick, like after, like, I guess around April, I let them tell me what they want to study and we go from there. And they usually want synthesis or they want like the super hard prompts. That's what they've wanted the past couple years. But like in the month before the exam, I let them tell me this is what we need. But rhetorical analysis is usually the hardest. I usually spend at least like 9 weeks on it I'm tutoring a student right now who is not in the class but is taking the exam, and we spent 9 weeks on rhetorical analysis. So I think that one just is the hardest to learn. How do you suggest preparing for the AP exam as a foreign speaker? That's a great question. So keep in mind, and this applies to English speakers as well. It does say on like the bullet points on some of the prompts, like use proper grammar and all that. But as long as they can read it, it's fine. So don't worry about using American spelling. Don't worry so much if you're using a comma or a semicolon wrong. I mean, obviously try to do the best you can, but like literally they do not care about spelling mistakes. You're human. Like I make spelling mistakes too. So don't worry so much about that. I think sometimes with international students, sometimes the phrasing is a little bit off, but like that's also to be expected. It's not your first language. So I would practice incorporating stronger words into your writing. And I do this with my students too. Like we'll look at our verb choice. We want to be very precise. Sometimes when they're revising, I have them go back in and add adjectives or adverbs to make it more accurate and more precise. Something else I have them do is like step one is kind of like get rid of the lower level language. So we want to not use words like a lot, huge, thing, good, bad, big. Those are all words that you can use a synonym for and make it more advanced. So that can help as well. But like as an international student, like there's sometimes the phrasing might be a little bit off, but as long as it's clear what you're trying to say, readers will work around that. So I wouldn't stress about it too much, but I do understand why it's a concern. So I would focus on choosing very precise words and like looking at your sentence structure if you're worried about your essays. Okay, let's see. What if there's words you've never seen on exams, like vocab? Okay, so the good news is they are kind of like taking those kinds of questions out. There are some words that I think you should know because like one of them is exigence. So EXIGENCE. It's part of the rhetorical situation. So if your teacher does space cat, it's the E in space cat. Exigence is like the catalyst. It's like the immediate reason why the person is giving the speech or writing the letter. And I've seen on AP Classroom, there's a couple questions where it's like, what is the exigence of the passage? If you don't know what that word means, it's really hard to answer. You still might get it right, but that's one that you should know. I made a list in a video, and I think I have a corresponding blog post about this too, where I went through all the terms that you should know for AP Lang. And it's not necessarily like rhetorical choices and stuff. Like, I don't think you need to know like a syndeton or an aphoret. Like, you don't need to know that kind of stuff. They're not going to ask you about that. But like, you need to know what a claim is and a thesis and evidence and commentary. And so in that video, I kind of go through like the basic vocab of AP Lang so that you know the tasks. So definitely check out that if you want further help. There's a few words like underscores means emphasizes. Sometimes students don't know that and they put that as like an answer choice for something. But instead of like using vocab, like they used to use like rhetorical devices as part of the answer. Now they're just using rhetorically accurate verbs. And I think that's more helpful to students. So there's not like a magical list of stuff you need to memorize. So yeah, like they used to make these lists. And if you come across a list of stuff that you need to memorize, it's probably old because there's not going to be a bunch of terms that you need to know. Now, AP Lit might be a little bit different, but AP Lang, no. The terms that you need to know, I have a video about that and I think a blog post. Do you think it's more of a memorization class or skill in writing? No, it's about, I think it's more of a writing class. There's not like stuff to memorize. Like there's things that you probably need to know, but yeah, it's not not like AP Bio. That's a memorization class to an extent, and APUSH is a memorization class in AP World. This is different. This is more like application. What's the difference between exigence, message, purpose, and occasion? Okay. Okay, so here's the thing. We used to use this acronym called SOAPSTONE, and some people had different versions of it, but it was basically like speaker, occasion, audience, purpose. And then I either saw it as strategies or subject and then tone. So then when the new exam came out, so like around 2019, someone came up with Space Cat. And SPACE-CAT stands for speaker, purpose, audience, context, exigence, and then choices, appeals, and tone. So you need to know the rhetorical situation. If we're talking about soapstone, it's the soap part. If we're talking about SPACE-CAT, it's the space part. So you need to know the speaker. The O for occasion just means context and exigence. So I try to use the terms context and exigence because that seems to be what the College Board is leaning to. But sometimes it makes more sense to say occasion. So occasion just means context and exigence. Context is big picture, like the historical stuff that's happening before, during, maybe even after. Think of it as like context is like the timeline. Exigence is like the immediate cause. So to give you a quick example, one of the speeches that we do in my class is FDR's Pearl Harbor speech. So like the context, we talk about how America was isolationist after World War I. We talk about like the Great Depression. We talk about like what was going on in Europe and why America didn't want to get into the war. That's all context. The exigence is the fact that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And that is why FDR gives his speech, is because he wants Congress to declare war. So context is big picture, timeline. Exigence is the immediate cause. And the reason why I say timeline is because sometimes if you're trying to do broader context, if it's like a famous event, you kind of know what happened in the future. So for instance, for Pearl Harbor, we know that the US did enter the war. So sometimes it's not just the past stuff leading up to it. Sometimes there's like a since that event context as well. So occasion equals context and exigence. All passages have a purpose. They either have a message or an argument, in my opinion. So when in doubt, you've always got purpose. Why are they making that choice? Why are they giving the speech? Some passages have like a more obvious message. So they still have a purpose, but the message is like the takeaway or the lesson. So your prompt is going to ask you about either the message, argument, or purpose. So message is like the lesson, like persevere. Argument is like when they're trying to persuade, like we should do this. And then purpose is just like the overall reason they're doing it. Like, are they trying to honor somebody? Are they trying to rally the crowd? Like, what is the reason behind it? So you can always analyze purpose, even if the prompt says message or argument. You should always incorporate the purpose, I think. But like message, if they ask about message, it's probably because there's a very clear message in the passage. Or if they ask about argument, it's probably because that's the easier thing to pick up on. And then like purpose is separate. So it's dumb, but I tell my students they're kind of like cousins or something. Like they're all kind of related. But like there's always a purpose and then usually either a message or an argument. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, the prompt is going to ask you about like one of those three. And like as far as how they choose, it really depends on the passage. So usually with like a eulogy, which is like a funeral speech, the purpose of that is to honor somebody. So they'll probably ask you about the purpose, like to pay tribute. If it's a graduation speech, there might be a message, like it could be to persevere, or they might just ask you about the purpose, which is like to motivate the crowd. So you could talk about either one. And sometimes in the prompt, they'll tell you what the message is. Like they'll say like her message of perseverance, but other times they might just say like her message. So what you want to do is as you're reading for rhetorical analysis, you want to ask yourself, okay, I'm being asked about message. What is her message? Or what is their argument or whatever it is? And don't just say what's in the prompt. So like if the prompt says like her message of perseverance, yes, you can say persevere. And you should always tell the person reading your essay what the message is. But you can also use synonyms too, like, I don't know, persist, never give up. I know that's kind of like more casual, but you get the idea. Like, don't just latch on to what is in the prompt, dig deeper and kind of vary it up, but you need to explicitly say what the message is. In your thesis, you absolutely need rhetorical choices, but I tell my students they should put the message, argument, or purpose in their thesis too. I have a sentence frame for this if you need help with that. But then in your body paragraphs, you need to be connecting to the message, argument, or purpose. And don't just say like, this helps them achieve their message, because that's when your essay is going to score a lower score, because you haven't actually told us what their message is or how it helps them or why it helps them. So like actually tell us what the message is. And that'll help your analysis as well. All right, so I'm happy to answer a few more questions. I can stay on for like another few minutes. If you're on TikTok and you're finding this helpful, do me a huge favor and tap your screen a couple times to give this some likes. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. That way, it'll like help the algorithm know that it's helpful. What is the highest score you can get with only 2 rhetorical choices? A 6. Yeah, there's no, you have to have at least 2, but like technically because you need multiple claims. But yeah, you can have 2 and still make a 6. I have a lot of students who've done it in the past. You do not need 3 body paragraphs. It can help, but I tell my students I would much rather see 2 quality body paragraphs than 3 mediocre ones. So as long as you have like 2 distinct main ideas and like 2 claims that you're proving, so 2 body paragraphs, you can earn like the top points. Now, for synthesis, you need to make sure you have 3 sources. But for rhetorical analysis, you can have a paragraph about one rhetorical choice and a paragraph about the other, and you can still score well. I would recommend that they be in chronological order, and you really got to dig into why they're making that choice. But yeah, you can have 2 choices. There's no issue for that at all. All right, what other questions do we have about AP Lang? And if you think of a question after this, feel free to reach out on TikTok, on YouTube. It's usually easier for me to answer questions on TikTok, if I'm being honest. But I go live every Sunday. That's my goal, is every Sunday until the exam. So if you think of something, it's going to be every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern, or if you're in my time zone, Central, it's 2 p.m. But I go live each week to answer questions. So if you think of something after this, then come back to the live next week and ask. No worries. But yeah, my goal is to help students prepare. And if you're looking for like additional content, I have like almost 4 years worth of videos on YouTube and about 2 years worth of content on TikTok. And I'm still going to be producing new videos. So if you literally just search for like Coach Hall writes and then whatever topic you want to know about, chances are I've made a video on it. Some of the topics I've visited a couple times, and there's even some that I'm making new videos about. So just feel free to use those to help. We had someone in the live earlier say that they think my videos helped them get a 5, which I've had a lot of students say that. But it's also you. I'm not taking the test for you. I'm just trying to help you prepare. Is there an online AP Lang test you can take at home instead of person? I know there's a digital test, but I don't think you can take it at home. I think you have to be at like a designated school or testing center. During COVID, they let students take it at home. And this year there is a digital version of the test, but I think it has to be taken at like specific locations. How can I go faster on the MCQ? Okay, so there's a couple of things to try. First of all, recognize that each question is only worth 1 point. So don't linger on questions too long. Some of my students have said that reading the questions first before reading the passage has helped. Don't read the answer choices. That's just going to confuse you. But sometimes if you read the questions first and then you kind of know what's being asked of you and like what you're supposed to be looking for, it can streamline the process. Also, if you're pressed for time, favor the questions that are very concrete. So like, what is the purpose of this paragraph? Or what is the word in line, whatever mean, as opposed to questions about the whole passage. Because usually if you can turn to a specific paragraph or line, you can answer those by reading the surrounding part and you can answer those more quickly. What are the multiple choice questions like? And how long do we take on those compared to the essays? Okay, so the multiple choice section is 45 questions in 1 hour. So they're going to time you. Then you get a break in between, about 10-minute break, and then you get 2 hours and 15 for the essays, 2 hours and 15 minutes. So they're totally separate sections of the test. Like you have like a booklet that you're working on, and then when you're done with it, you have to like seal it closed and put it under your chair and all that. So there's like a whole procedure. They tell you what to do, but basically like multiple choice is its own section and the essays are its own section. So 45 questions in 1 hour. Now, remember, half of those questions are going to be reading comprehension questions. So about like 23 to 24 questions are going to be reading comprehension. Those are the questions like, what is the function of the paragraph? Why did the writer make this comparison? What does this word mean? What is the author's tone? Things like that. And then the writing questions, which are the second part, usually there's like, 20, 21 of those questions. Those are more like editing. So how can the writer combine these sentences? The writer wants to add a sentence here. Should they do so? Yes or no? The writer wants to reorganize the paragraph. Where does this sentence belong? Those types of things. They don't ask you about commas, semicolons, dashes like they do on the SAT and ACT. It's more about like how to write in edits. And so you get an hour. My students usually, if they take the whole hour, they usually spend about 35 minutes on the reading questions and about 25 minutes on the writing questions, because the writing questions are usually a little bit faster. Also, if you're taking the paper test at least, but I think the digital test, they now let you skip around a little bit too. I have some students who are better at writing questions, and so they know they have to go to passage 3, and they do 3, 4, 5, and then they go back to the reading. Because like if their accuracy is good for writing and like they just need a little bit more time, they start there. Most of my students start at question 1 and kind of work their way through. But I have had a few students, a couple last year and a couple the year before, I think, start, and I have a couple that are practicing this now in class. They start with the writing because that's their wheelhouse and their strength. And we found that they get a better, like a higher score if they start with the, like that part, because they're stronger at it. So anyway, take that for what it's worth. But basically answer every question, even if it's a guess. So if like time is running out and you've got a minute left and you still have like 10 questions left, pick a single letter, A, D, doesn't matter what letter it is, just bubble it in, straight line, just bubble it in. Give yourself a chance to at least get it right. Do you have any tips for identifying rhetorical choices? Okay, yes. So first of all, it's going to sound kind of basic, but ask yourself, what is the writer doing? The other thing is like there's certain choices that are kind of common, like, let's see, well, word choice is in everything. So if you are in a total panic, word choice and tone. Try not to write about logos, ethos, pathos, the appeals. You can bring those up, but focus on the choice that's creating the appeal. So for instance, with logic, if they're appealing to logic, which say logic or like logical, don't say logos. Usually that's like facts, statistics, sometimes examples. For emotion, it's usually going to be like detail. We tend to say detail for nonfiction and not imagery. Word choice, things like that. So instead of like, oh, I wonder where the comparison is, like there might not be a comparison, but it does help to kind of know like maybe like 10 to 12 rhetorical choices that are pretty common, in case you see that. But like literally just ask yourself, okay, what are they doing to begin their speech? And sometimes it can be kind of broad. Like, are they acknowledging a situation? Are they informing the public? Like, ask yourself, what are they doing? Because sometimes we get so bogged down with like rhetorical choices or rhetorical devices that if you just ask yourself, what are they doing? That's going to be a better answer. Logos, ethos, and pathos confuse me. I never understand identifying them. Yeah, that's okay. Like, don't stress about that, because like we sometimes see on the exam, people will write one paragraph about logos, ethos, pathos. Those essays tend to not score well. So I teach my students what they mean, but you have to remember choices create appeals. So you really want to focus on what the writer is doing to make it logical. And then with emotional appeals, always tell us what the emotion is. Don't just say they appeal to emotion, because that tells me nothing. Like, are they appealing to patriotism, fear, sympathy, pity? Like, what is it? If you want more information about rhetorical appeals, if you type in like Coach Hall writes rhetorical appeals, I do have a video about that tells you how to write about the choices that create the appeals. Don't worry about fallacies either. I don't even teach fallacies, because like most of the things that they give you on the exam don't have fallacies in them, or like, yeah, like I think it, like some teachers think it's like important to know, but I literally don't teach them. And like, if you gave me a quiz on fallacies right now, I don't know that I would do super well. Like I'd probably make like an 80 at best. Like, it's like, I know what they are, but like, I don't teach them. It's not part of, what my students have needed to know to be successful on the exam. Yes, please do check out my channel. I will be posting new content as well, as the exam gets closer. But I have playlists on there. I will get playlists on TikTok once I can get to 10K. So seriously, like shameless plug, if you have AP Lang friends, because I always get comments like, why is this on my FYP? Like, I don't know, the algorithm works in mysterious ways, but if I can get to 10K, then I can make playlists. And then that way, like when you're cramming for the exam and you have questions, you can literally just go to the playlist. But I will be doing lives weekly and answering questions, and like we'll be doing some lives with Tim Freitas from the Garden of English on YouTube, where we answer a ton of student questions. I'll be doing some workshops that'll be linked in my, like on my website. If you go to my link tree on TikTok, if you want individualized help. But I'll also be doing some stuff just for students here too. So lots of ways to get your questions answered. My teacher said we'd have to remember them. Maybe for an in-class assignment, but not on the exam. I don't know. Sometimes some teachers do really emphasize those, but like no, they're not really on the test. So could be good to know, but yeah, don't stress about that for the exam. I literally don't go over them, and like my students have never needed to know them. So do we have to remember how to cite everything? It's good to know how to do a parenthetical citation. That's the one where you put it in parentheses at the end of the sentence. You need to cite for synthesis. You do not need to cite for rhetorical analysis. It's not in the rubric. And with synthesis, they're usually pretty forgiving, but it seriously helps the person reading your paper if you have the citation at the end of the sentence. So if you're looking for that, I have 2 videos that are pretty recent about citations. One's a little bit more in depth than the other, but if you type in like Coach Hall writes how to cite sources or something like that, those videos should pop up. And I give examples. Is AP Lang really hard? It really depends on who your teacher is, because and like what your background is. Like if you're not that good at, like if English is not your forte, it might be hard. My students tell me it is their easiest AP class. But I think that's also because of how I teach it. I know that there are some schools that it's really hard. So it's really hard to say. If you're okay at English and you want to get like preparation for college level writing, I would say take it. Some teachers do grade harder because of that. So like it's hard to say. But I personally do think the class is valuable. And I'm not just saying that because I teach it. I've had students where I have like begged them to take the class because I knew they were going to be going to college and they needed that prep, and like I have not had a single one regret it. Like, and I say that because they came back to me and they were like, you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And I'm so glad I listened to you. So I do think it can be really valuable if you're just trying to like learn how to be a better writer and prepare for college. It can be very helpful, but some teachers are harder than others. Which essays do we need MLA format for? On the exam, you don't need MLA format because you're handwriting it in most cases. But like in college, if it's like an English class, you use MLA. And if it's like a science class or like other stuff, you use APA. History is this weird format called Chicago. But yeah, you just need the parenthetical citations and that's it. So yeah. Okay. I can answer a couple more questions, but then I got to go because I am meeting up with somebody to sell something on Facebook. So hopefully everything's safe. But anyway, not that y'all needed to know that, but whatever. You want to go into law, so I feel like you feel like you need to take it. Yes, I would recommend it because I think it's going to help you with, specifically with law. You need to know how to argue, and that is one of the core like concepts of the class. So yeah, I would say take it if you want to be a lawyer. How can I prep though? So if you're not currently in the class but you're trying to prepare, pay attention in your other classes like civics, history, things like that, because the world knowledge can help with argument. Just be an informed person, like stay up to date on current events, read nonfiction if you can, but there isn't really a whole lot you can do to prepare. I have students who start from like square one and they're fine. Any other quick tips for rhetorical analysis? Let's see. My best tip, I think, that students kind of fall short on most of the time is make sure that you explicitly say what the message, argument, or purpose is in each of your body paragraphs and connect what you're analyzing to that message, argument, or purpose. I have some videos. I actually have a video on YouTube where it's like my best tip for rhetorical analysis. And I think I go into that a little bit more concretely there. And I also have some just general tips videos there too. How do I see the exact main point of an essay? So like the passage that you're reading, you just kind of want to ask yourself, like, start with like a basic question, like, what is this about? Like, what is the subject? And then kind of like go deeper from there. And then when you're writing the essay, your main idea is going to be your thesis. So yeah. All right. So anyway, those are some great questions. Please come back next week. If you have more questions, reach out on TikTok if you have questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. But I have lots of like previous content too that hopefully is helpful. And I will be doing new content. So if you don't mind, if you're on TikTok, give me a couple extra likes before we go if you found this helpful. If you're watching on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're following, and that way I can help you prepare. Yes. So how can you prepare for AP Lang? There isn't a whole lot that you can or should do to prepare. Be informed of current events if you can, because that kind of helps with your argument essay. Pay attention to your teacher's feedback on your writing and apply corrections. Pay attention in history class. My students who've taken like honors in AP history tend to do really well with argument essays if they can make it fit the prompt. But yeah, I'll be back live next week, 3 p.m. Eastern, and I'll be answering questions. How much homework? That depends on the teacher. I don't give homework. Or if I do, they have multiple nights to complete it. And they usually all procrastinate. But I try very hard not to do homework, but some teachers do. So talk to people at your school, because that's like a very specific thing. Yeah. It really just depends. But I don't give a lot of homework, but some teachers do. My class is lucky. Yeah, I mean, I think they would tell you that. Like they tell me it's the easiest AP class that they have, and like they know. Like, but I also teach them for 2 years, so I kind of don't have to go as hard because, and I don't know. I just we get the job done. They score well. We're good. So, but yeah, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for asking great questions, and I hope to see you next week.